What do the Bible stories of Moses, David, and the prophets teach about the relationship that God wants with humanity? What kind of relationship does God want to have with us? This question is answered on Mount Sinai. We can see here on your map that Mount Sinai exists in what's called the Sinai Peninsula. It's kind of in between Egypt on one side and Saudi Arabia on the other. And then to the north, there's the modern state of Israel, which actually is also the traditional historical biblical location of Israel. So you can see that from Egypt, the Israelites travel into a desert wilderness, and they come up to this mountain. This is actually Mount Sinai right here. You can see that it's actually a really scary and intimidating place. And it's this mountain that Moses goes up to encounter God. This is a sunny day in this picture, but you can imagine dark clouds, fierce lightning, windstorms, earthquakes, and you can imagine being at the bottom of this intimidating looking mountain, looking up and noting that Moses is at the top, hidden from view in the cloud, and having a conversation with God. It's kind of a big deal. So the idea of covenant. While God made a covenant with Abraham, he now makes a covenant with all of Abraham's descendants, now called Israelites. And through Moses on Mount Sinai, God teaches 10 commandments as a way to live well. Now, when God breaks into human history, he actually uses human ideas and human institutions and human words to communicate something of how he wants to be in relationship with us. So Abraham, Moses, and King David live in a world where covenant is an agreement for a powerful king to take under his care a weaker king and his people. Here we have an illustration. Looks to me like it's from Persia or maybe Syria. And the king is powerful. He's drawn bigger. He's seated and he's up high. And below him is what might be a vassal king, somebody who's indebted to him for his protection. So God says, this is the kind of relationship that I want to have with my people. So the big question is, what does Israel do to kind of invite or ask God or for God to be in this position of initiating a relationship with them? Well, Israel actually doesn't do anything or can't really do anything. They cry out to him while they're slaves, but in fact, there's nothing that they can do to make God be in relationship with them. There's nothing they can do to make God help them. They ask for his help, but from God's response, we realize that the Bible is telling us something really amazing about God. And that is that there is actually nothing anyone can do to deserve God's help. If he's willing to help slaves in Egypt, he's willing to help us, and actually anything that we do to try to make him help us is not going to be effective. In fact, it's his love and his care and concern for us that allows us to be in relationship with him. Ultimately, God helps because he wants to. So an important question here in the Exodus story is, how does God respond to human evil in this story? And we have a very clear example of human evil. And throughout the entire Exodus story and into the promised land, God sets up this relationship where he tries to teach humans about justice and peace. He tries to correct them when they've done something evil. So he keeps asking Pharaoh, Pharaoh, work with me here. Set my people free. Do justice. Do peace, Pharaoh. But in the end, when Pharaoh refuses, God does not protect the violent from the violence that they choose. So that's part of God's response. If we choose violence, God allows that violence to unfold in our lives because it's our choice. The next thing that God does in response to human evil is he tries to teach. When Israel cooperates with God, he teaches the people a non-violent way to live with each other, and he promises to remain with them. As the slaves come out of Egypt, they have no society. They have no structure. We can imagine that actually the Israelite slaves in Egypt, it's very possible that while they cried out to God, it's possible that they just kind of took into themselves the kind of violence that the Egyptians acted upon them. We can imagine that if they tried to set up another society and all they knew was what they experienced in Egypt, they would set up a society just like Egypt. So God, in his compassion and his mercy, he's giving them the 10 Commandments so that they have the freedom to choose another way, to choose a non-violent way. And then how long does the covenant last? Well, not very long. In the Bible story, while Moses is up on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments, the Israelites who have already agreed to them, Moses has received the commandments and brought them to the people, and the people have agreed to them. Moses goes back up the mountain, and he's gone so long, they start worshiping another god. So they break the covenant, and in that way, they're kind of going back to Egypt. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, and then eventually socially, they're going to be behaving just like they were taught in Egypt. Now, God responds to this, and in the Bible story, we hear that God is angry. He set them free, he showed them a nonviolent path, and now they're reverting back to a path of destruction, a path that actually destroyed the Egyptians and threatened to destroy them. So in that anger, God responds with discipline. He says, you know what? You made a commitment, and you did not live up to it. But the other thing about God at this crucial moment is that when Moses prays for the people, God does not destroy them, and God does not abandon them. So in other words, God remains faithful to his commitment, even though humanity here in the nation of Israel is not faithful to our end of the bargain. And this is another important thing that the Bible teaches us about God and his response to human evil. Here's a question. What is a covenant? And today we sometimes use that word, but because it's so closely associated with the Bible and not actually with outside of the Bible that much, it can be confusing. Just what is it that we mean when we say God enters into a covenant with his people? Well, the ancient term talked about that the covenant is a particular relationship or agreement between persons. This covenant is a healthy one, it's a trusting one, it's mutual, so both parties enter into it freely, and it's a positive relationship. So both parties are in some way brought to the good. They're better off because they're into this, and they're attentive to the other person. Also say that there are other words in our society that do have to do with covenant, such as other words that could be connected to covenant are a partnership, a friendship, an agreement. A covenant is very much like a contract, but a little bit different. A family, a treaty, or a marriage. Let's take a look at some of these more closely. So covenant is a personal exchange of freely made commitments. In some ways, a contract is an exchange of commitments. I pay you $10 and you mow my lawn. I go to Walmart and I buy an item and they provide that item to me. Those are both contracts. But a covenant is more than a contract. From a Catholic point of view, marriage is also more than just a contract. You can't put everything that marriage demands down on a piece of paper ahead of time. Right? So if I enter into a contract with my real estate agent to sell me a house, and then that real estate agent doesn't sell me a house or takes my money and runs. I have all this piece of paper that says, you know what, this is what we agreed to do, and you didn't live up to that. But as you know, in a married relationship, you can't actually put down everything that you will do in your marriage to keep that marriage strong and healthy, to support your spouse and to receive support from your spouse. So in my family, right, uh, I made vows to my wife, but I didn't say that I would leave my socks at the foot of the bed every single night, and she would have to just live with that and wait for me to kind of collect about 20 pairs of socks and throw them in the laundry at once. Uh, we didn't know that was coming down the pipe. It would be impossible to put that in a piece of paper. So marriage is more than a contract. It's kind of a trusting and to some degree open-ended agreement to live in a certain way. So marriage is a type of covenant. In the Bible, God talks about his people as if they are his spouse. For as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your builder marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. From the book of the prophet Isaiah. Now, covenant happens in a moment of decision, but that moment of decision isn't the end of it, and there isn't even a conclusion to it. A covenant extends through time into a new reality that it creates. This, back to the marriage thing, dating someone is a moment of decision, but it doesn't create a new reality, right? It's only as a relationship grows and both people invest commitment into it that there's this new reality called a marriage. But the other thing that covenant makes me think of is treaty. From a Canadian point of view, treaty happens in a moment of time, but also extends through time, so that the new reality endures for the parties to choose to live faithfully to it. So in other words, treaty is a kind of covenant. Now, like covenant, we know that in Canada, the treaties haven't always been honored. Yet, even though they haven't always been honored, those treaties don't stop. Okay, so at a certain point, like a contract, if I buy a car from you and you don't actually deliver me the car, well, I get my money back and that's the end of it. But a treaty and a covenant endure longer because they actually create a new reality. Here's some words from a treaty. So that there may be peace and goodwill between them and Her Majesty, and that they may know and be assured what allowance they are to count upon and receive from Her Majesty's bounty and benevolence. This is referring to the First Nations as they enter into treaty with the representatives of the Queen. And that's actually from Treaty Number 6, the treaty that created the reality that I live in. So covenant is also a partnership. We do something together with a common vision. So one word that is often used is alliance, or you're my ally. Now, an alliance technically is an agreement to protect and benefit each other's interests. So for example, I will fight your enemies if you fight mine. And alliances sometimes can be good things, but an alliance is that each side only wants what benefits themselves. A covenant is more. In a covenant, we share our deepest desires, and we agree to take each other's desires on as our own. So we see that in a marriage, and we see that in a treaty, where people say, you know what, what's good for you, I've decided that what's good for you is good for me, and I am going to invite you into what's good for me being good for you. Because our vision, our destination, our journey together we've decided that that vision, that common vision, is going to be the same. And we're back in the Bible with this one, where God says, I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. this deep sense of partnership between God and his people. So what do the Bible stories of Moses, David, and the prophets teach about the relationship that God wants with humanity? The covenant is a marriage between God and his people. It's a treaty that creates a new reality that's lived out, come what may, that it cannot actually be ended. And it's a friendship. It's God sharing his goodness with us, and us, to the degree that we can, returning God's goodness that he gives to us to him and to his glory. And here it's between God and Israel. Is the Mosaic covenant? The Mosaic covenant is an exchange of terms. Israel will trust God by living the Ten Commandments, and God will protect Israel and give them the promised land.